California Dreaming is brought to you by BLUBRRY. You know, there is a little bit more to making a podcast than just talking into a mic and hitting publish. You need more than that. And I'm talking about a reliable hosting service so your time can be spent working on your show. You also want accurate download numbers, you want to see the audience that you're reaching, and you're going to want a webpage that is simple and easy to work with. That's why I choose BLUBRRY. With its simple media hosting and fully integrated WordPress website, it can't get any easier. So if you host a show or if you're thinking about starting one, visit www.orbitaljigsaw.com/dream to give BLUBRRY a try for a month for free. BLUBRRY's support team will be right there every step of the way to help you migrate over so you won't lose any of your subscribers in the process. And if you're brand new to this, they can get your new show up and running. And with a month for free to try it out using promo code DREAM, what have you got to lose? There are a number of ways that you can support California Dreaming. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can spread the word about the show. You can recommend us in podcast and true crime fan groups. And you can leave the show a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you listen to the show on. And if you would like to go a little above and beyond, you can also support the show on our Patreon. You can gain access to at least one exclusive episode per month, and there are currently more than 40 episodes that you can binge, so it's a pretty good deal for just $1. And so far for the month of July, we have 2 bonuses up. Both of them are available to supporters at all tier levels. The first case is the story of the murder of James Byrd Jr. in Jasper, Texas back in 1998. And the second story is the compelling saga of the Billionaire Boys Club. So if you're a patron, go and check those out and leave me your comments about the episodes and some feedback and what you thought. There are also a handful of premium episodes available for supporters at the $5 and above tiers. And these thank yous are going back to subscribers who joined in May. I'm way behind and I'm so sorry. I'd like to thank Elizabeth B., Margaret M., Raina, Diane M., Michelle M., Natalie H., Kelsey R., Juliet K., and Ryan H. and Kara M. for joining Patreon. And I'd like to thank Lindsay L., M.A., Sherry R., Zoe H., and Evelyn L. for raising their pledges to the next tier. And don't worry, if you have joined Patreon since May and June and now into July, your shout out is coming, I promise, and your thank you cards. I'm back on track here. Also, if you were unable to sign up for a monthly subscription to Patreon, you can help with a one-time donation to the show through our PayPal using our email, californiapod@gmail.com. Every little bit helps us keeping California Dreaming going, so your donations and your support is greatly appreciated. The word changeling has a variety of different meanings and definitions. Historically, it is a human-like creature depicted in religious folklore throughout Europe, believed to be a fairy child that would be left in the place of a human child who had been stolen by the fairies. The premise of the child swapped out like this has been common in medieval literature, rooted in fear or anxiety over newborn infants that are thought to be stricken with some sort of ailment, disease, or developmental disability. A changeling has a number of features and characteristics that make the fairy child identifiable, such as an appearance of being unwell or ailing, kind of a sickly child. The child won't grow to be the size of a normal child and may even develop long teeth or facial hair. The changeling will also often have a level of intelligence much higher than typical for their apparent age, as well as possess an almost supernatural level of insight. And the reasons why the human child would be taken and replaced with a changeling is due to a variety of reasons. One might be because the human child was wanted to be made a servant. There may have been a desire for the love of a human child, or the human child may have been taken out of spite or malice. Sometimes the fairies would replace their most elderly of the fairies in exchange for the human baby, so the old fairy could be cared for in their old age by their brand new human parents. Whatever the case and whatever the reasons, historians believe that the idea of the changeling is demonstrative of the importance of the survival of the family in medieval Europe and how a family's sustenance often depended on the ability of each member of the family to be able-bodied and productive. And the changeling often had an incredibly insatiable appetite, and its presence was a sustained and ongoing drain on the family resources, which remained a constant threat to the subsistence of the family as a whole. Historical tales of changelings often support the theory that when there was an infant born into a family, and that infant was going to be a threat to their survival, parents often chose infanticide as the solution to their problem. Now, dreamers, I realize that this is going off into areas that we usually don't stray, folklore and mythology. But I did think it was kind of interesting. And, when we see or hear the word changeling, it's not a word that we use that often, but it is quite prevalent in literature. And the first play entitled Changeling was written in 1622 and is regarded as one of the greatest tragedies of the English Renaissance. There have been at least a dozen or more books and novels written mostly throughout the 20th century, as recent as 2008, all of them with the same title or the word changeling in the title. In comics, in both Marvel and DC, changelings are shape-shifting superheroes. Changelings have been referenced in gaming, including Dungeons and Dragons, and it was the title of one role-playing game in the 1990s and one in the 2000s. And changeling has been referenced in film, television, and music. Any fans of The Doors? Jim Morrison wrote a song on his last album, LA Woman, called The Changeling, which was about Morrison's own constant transformation. He wrote the song in 1968. He recorded it in 1970. The album was released April 19, 1971. It was the first song, Side A, and it is regarded as one of The Doors' most underrated songs. But this is not a mythology or a music podcast. We are here for the crime. And the changeling we are going to be discussing today was depicted in the 2008 film aptly named The Changeling, starring Angelina Jolie. I've not seen the film yet. I don't know. At the time, it kind of sort of flew under the radar. It was not just for me, and my daughter was about 9, and that was actually the exact age of the victim in the story. But for a lot of people, and ironically, some have said that its commercial success or lack of success may have been affected by the title itself, The Changeling, it being a title that doesn't exactly jump out at you. For me, I'm not the biggest Angelina Jolie fan in the world, and honestly, the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen her in was Kung Fu Panda. Though I may eventually sit down and watch this film that we're talking about here today. It was directed by Clint Eastwood. It performed modestly at the box office. It had a budget of $55 million and it ended up grossing $113 million. However, it was very, very critically acclaimed, having garnered dozens of award nominations, including 3 Academy Award nominations, 2 Golden Globe nominations, 8 BAFTA nominations, 3 Critics' Choice Awards nominations, and a Screen Actors Guild Award nomination. However, the film didn't win any of them. The Changeling is consistently listed as one of the best films of 2008, and the lead role of Christine Collins is portrayed by Angelina Jolie and is considered one of her best performances of her career. The Changeling will take us through quite a journey involving themes we continue to struggle with today: political and police corruption, as well as corruption in the medical establishment, the disempowerment of women, and of course, the reason we are here every single week for California Dreaming, the crime. Specifically for this story, kidnapping, crimes against children, and serial killing. This story has it all. So without further ado, let's get into this 150th episode of California Dreaming, the tale of the Changeling. Our story today is sort of two-pronged. We have the story of the Changeling, and along with that we have a second story that runs parallel to it, known as the Wineville chicken coop murders. Of course, there is a place where these two stories intersect, or at least are believed to have intersected, and we'll eventually get to that. But first, I want to go over the Changeling portion of this case. The backdrop of our story today is 1928 Los Angeles. What was going on in the world in 1928? Well, Betty White was in about kindergarten or first grade. Charles Lindbergh was given the Medal of Honor by President Calvin Coolidge for making the first transatlantic flight the year before. Amelia Earhart would go on later on in 1928 to become the first woman to make a successful transatlantic flight as a passenger, though not a pilot yet. Disney released an animated short with the very first appearance of Mickey and Minnie Mouse. Scottish inventor James Baird demonstrated the world's first color TV transmission in Glasgow. The very first machine-sliced and machine-wrapped loaf of bread was sold in Chillicothe, Missouri. Women's athletics debuted for the very first time at the Summer Olympics in Amsterdam, and Coca-Cola made its European debut as a sponsor of those Olympics. In the United States, we had a couple of prolific serial killers running around at the time, Carl Panzram and Albert Fish. At St. Mary's Hospital in London, a Scotsman named Alexander Fleming accidentally discovered a mold growing in his lab that was killing bacteria, which would later become known as penicillin. The Red Cross was formally established. An iron lung was used for the first time at a children's hospital in Boston. Herbert Hoover was elected the 31st President of the United States and would lead the country through the Great Depression, which was just on the horizon at the time the story takes place. The MGM lion would roar for the very first time at the beginning of the movie White Shadows in the South Seas. RCA established its very first TV station, W2XBS, in New York City. Elliot Ness became the head of the Prohibition Unit in Chicago, Illinois, as the country was still at least 5 years away from the end of Prohibition. And Adolf Hitler was doing his thing, publishing his writings in Germany. Joseph Stalin was in Russia, getting his 5-year political plan started. And Benito Mussolini, in power in Italy at the time, had survived one of a number of assassination attempts that year. So there was a lot going on in the world at the time that our story takes place. All the way in our little corner of the world. 1928, Los Angeles, California. The protagonist of our story is a woman named Christine Ida Dunn. She was originally from Seattle, Washington. She was born December 14th, 1888. She spent her early life in Seattle, eventually making her way down to the Los Angeles area, where she met and married a man named Walter J. Collins, which was actually not his real name. He was an ex-con whose real name was Walter Joseph Anson, but he had changed his name and completely kept his criminal past a secret from Christine. Together, the couple had one son, Walter, born in September of 1918. Eventually, the elder Walter found himself in trouble with the law once again, having been arrested, charged, and convicted of armed robbery. He was sent to Folsom State Prison, but he never made it back out, as he ended up passing away while incarcerated. So Christine Collins found herself living in Los Angeles, raising her son as a single mom, a widow. She was just doing her thing, holding it down, and she was doing it on her own. By the time this story takes place in 1928, Christine's son Walter was 9. She had been promoted to a supervisor at her job at a telephone switchboard operator station. I've gone through a lot of history so far in this episode, so I won't go too deeply into it. But in the early days of the phone company, they used to have operators who connected phone calls manually by inserting the caller's phone plugs into the appropriate jacks. You would call and the operator would answer, and you would ask to be connected to this person or that person, and they'd connect the right plugs into the right jacks so that you can make your call. Eventually, those systems were phased out and replaced by automated systems that mainstream direct dial calling between callers. When it comes to movies, if you like period pieces, for The Changeling, they recreated the whole switchboard system where Christine was working. And it's all women who work there. And what I didn't know is that since Christine was a supervisor, and because the switchboard operation was a fairly large one, and we're talking about individual phone jacks for every single phone in the area, so the building in which these switchboards would be housed was pretty extensive. And the supervisors, they would travel around the facility by roller skate to make it easier and more efficient. And these aren't like roller skates that you slip your foot into the boot and lace them up. These are metal wheels that get strapped to the heels that these ladies are wearing. So Angelina Jolie, as a part of her role, had to learn how to roller skate in these things in high heels. So on March 10th, 1928, and this was a Saturday, Christine had work on that particular day. It was the weekend, it was the afternoon. So in order to keep her son Walter entertained and busy, she gave him some money so he could go to the movies. I don't know if Walter ever made it to the movies or not, but at some point after Mom had gone to work and Walter had gone on with his day, he vanished. For one reason or another, Walter's disappearance was widely covered by the media nationwide. And I was able to look around online and see a number of articles that the Los Angeles Times had written about this story. So there is a pretty good record of it out there. However, why the story was such big news in the media, I don't know. It doesn't seem like local crimes or stories like this would typically make national headlines. I mean, if you're familiar with Megan Good's website, thecharlieproject.org, then you know she named her website, which is meant to be a way of streamlining information regarding missing persons. And she has more than 14,000 cases as of this recording. She named the website after kidnapping victim Charlie Ross. He vanished July 1st, 1874 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is the very first known kidnapping for ransom in the United States to receive nationwide attention. Charlie was never recovered. Whatever happened to him remains a mystery to this day, and it is considered to be one of the most infamous cases in history. So some 54 years after the Charlie Ross case, Walter Collins was kidnapped. And I don't know how many kidnapping cases received national attention in the interim, but I am under the impression that it might be similar to the way certain cases make big news nowadays, and certain cases don't. His was one of those. Walter's kidnapping occurred just 9 days shy of exactly 4 years before the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr., commonly known as the Lindbergh baby, who was kidnapped March 1st, 1932 in East Amwell, New Jersey. Just 4 years earlier was Walter's kidnapping. The Lindbergh baby, his father, Charles Lindbergh, as you know, was an aviator and a highly decorated member of the U.S. military, an inventor and an activist. This baby was his first and would have been the oldest of 13 children. He was kidnapped for a ransom. The ransom was paid, but the baby was never turned over and was eventually found deceased a little more than 2 months later alongside a road. Eventually, a man named Richard Hauptmann was arrested, convicted, and put to death by electrocution 2 years after the kidnapping. Of course, there are many who make the case for his innocence. I don't know, I haven't delved into that story too deeply, but anyway, that case has long been referred to as the crime of the century. The trial was called the trial of the century until O.J. Simpson's trial for the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman won the distinction of being dubbed the trial of the century too. The Lindbergh case made huge news. The Lindbergh baby was featured on the cover of the May 1932 edition of Time magazine. The media attention can be attributed to his father's prominence in the world of aviation. But whatever it was that caused Walter's case to go viral, it's hard to say, but it did, which could have been a good thing. But there was also going to be a downside to it as well. It's also important to mention right now that at the time that this happens, in 1928, the Los Angeles Police Department did not exactly have the best reputation as a law enforcement agency. I know, that's shocking news, a corrupt police department. In all seriousness, though, I don't know if the LAPD had had a particularly bad reputation that the entire country knew about, more so than other small law enforcement agencies. If it was worse because it was bigger, or it had more notoriety because it was such a large city with a large police force, or if it was just worse than most other departments, or if it just got more attention. It's just not been a secret for a really long time that the department was very, very problematic for decades. So the LAPD are tasked with investigating Walter's disappearance. Because his case had gotten so much attention, leads were pouring in, but all of them were dead ends. As the case lingered with no answers, the LAPD was again starting to look bad. The public perception was really negative, and there was a resounding demand for this case to be solved. They wanted this boy to be found, and they demanded that the police do their job and do it right. The LAPD did not have the trust of the public, so it was a great deal of pressure coming at them from every direction. At the same time, as much as the LAPD knows and understands that they are not trusted, that the public has absolutely no faith in their ability to effectively solve crimes, the department was interested in attempting to find a way to change that perception of them. They wanted to turn it around. They wanted to figure out how to get people to see them as a legitimate law enforcement agency rather than a bunch of incompetent, corrupt cops. And one of the ways that they thought that they could change the public image of the LAPD was to solve a really high-profile case. So, when the Walter Collins case happened, so much media and public attention had been focused on it, they began to think like, wow, if we could really solve this, if we could find Walter and bring him home safe and sound to his mom, we're going to come out the other end of this like superheroes. So that's what the department decided to do. They put as much of their resources into Walter's disappearance as they possibly could, and they worked his case hard because it had made such big news. If they could solve it, and then they figured that they could change their entire public image, and they wanted to find him alive and make a big, huge production out of it, make the department out to look like they saved the day, and everyone would get the hell off their backs about all the other sleazy things that they do. The public would love them, so they really, really, really wanted to solve this. But there was one big, huge problem. They could not find Walter Collins. Over the course of about 5 months, the department worked tirelessly to bring this child home so they could parade him in front of the media and make a big hoopla out of the reunion between abducted son and his mother. But he was nowhere to be found. And they really wanted this for the department, you know? They wanted to find him and use this whole thing as this huge publicity stunt. But they were coming up empty. And suddenly, 5 months after Walter had gone missing, seemingly out of nowhere, about 2,000 miles or 3,200 kilometers from Los Angeles, in a town about 60 miles or 95 kilometers east of Chicago called DeKalb, Illinois. A child was discovered who was making the assertion that he was, in fact, the missing boy from Los Angeles, Walter Collins. So the LAPD got in touch with authorities out there in Illinois. They had a few letters and pictures of the boy sent over for Christine to look at and to read, after which she agreed to cover the costs of having him brought across the country and back to Los Angeles. So yeah, the LAPD wouldn't even foot the bill for his travel expenses, right? Some superheroes, huh? So the police department, this was their chance. This was going to be their opportunity to make a big, huge thing out of this reunion between the boy and his mom. They were going to plan this big event. They announced it to the media and all the newspapers that they found the missing Walter Collins, and they were inviting everyone to come and see the reunion take place, which was going to happen at the train station that Walter was scheduled to arrive at. And of course, Christine was there. She was very anxious and excited to be reunited with her child. All the high-ranking LAPD brass were there wearing their best dress uniforms for this occasion. I mean, this was a huge deal for the police. They needed this exact thing to happen in order to change the negative perception of the department. And they were going to be able to take credit for solving this huge missing persons case, an abducted child. They wanted to very publicly pat themselves on the back and give themselves all the huge props for a job well done, right? Well, the funny thing was that the LAPD really didn't have anything to do with finding Walter. He sort of found himself, told the police his identity, and it all just stemmed from there. But it didn't matter. The police were putting on their show, and it was to be a very exciting moment for everybody. But Houston, we have a problem. When the boy steps down off the train onto the platform, and Christine Collins lays her eyes on him for the first time in 5 months, she immediately realizes that she is not looking at her son, Walter Collins. This is not her son. Lots of us listening are moms and dads. We know our kids. And of course, the same absolutely can be said for Christine. She's thinking in her head, this is not him. I mean, is her mind playing tricks on her? Or is she not seeing clearly? Is the excitement overwhelming to a point where she's not thinking straight? No, she's certain, 100%, this boy is not her child. She's standing there, and everyone is watching. All the police, spectators, media, photographers, newspapers. I mean, this is a very crowded and very charged and energized moment. It was meant to be this spectacular, emotional reunion. So Christine, I'm sure, is not wanting to make a spectacle of herself or of this moment. So she quietly and discreetly goes over to the police captain and she's like, that's not Walter, and I have no idea who that child is, but it is not Walter. Here's the crazy thing, though. The kid spoke up, and he was like, yeah, I'm Walter Collins. And Christine was completely flabbergasted at what's happening here. You can imagine it's like being in the Twilight Zone or in some bizarre parallel universe where you feel like you're having some sort of otherworldly experience. I mean, think about it, dreamers, moms, dads, put yourself in Christine's place for just a moment. You've been living with the fact that your son has been missing, presumed kidnapped, possibly dead, for 5 months. I don't think any of us could sleep or eat or do much of anything while trying to cope with and deal with our missing child. And then 5 months later, you get word that your child was found 2,000 miles away, alive. And then as soon as you lay your eyes on him, you realize it's not him. It's like a nightmare, except this is actually happening. So this side conversation is going on between Christine and the police captain and this kid who's claiming to be Walter. And Christine is like, this is not him. And this kid is like, I'm him. And what does the police captain say? Well, inside, I'm sure he's horrified. He's arranged for this very, very public spectacle of a reunion. This was supposed to be the thing to shift public opinion for the better when it came to the general sentiment towards the LAPD as a department. And now this mom is trying to throw a monkey wrench into the entire thing by claiming this isn't her son, when the boy is sitting here insisting that he is her son. The captain was like, no, this is not happening. This is not going to end like this in front of all these people with all this media and everybody looking on. Just no. We are already so reviled by everybody. Everybody thinks we have no idea how to do our jobs, that our entire department is a joke. How is it going to look if we have to reveal that we put out a call for all the media to show up to this thing, and then the mom is going to try and claim that it was all a big mix-up and this isn't her son? And that, no, we, the LAPD, in fact, did not solve this case of the disappearance of Walter Collins. We've now got this other boy on our hands claiming to be Walter Collins, and we're supposed to sit here and allow Christine to publicly tell everybody that this is an imposter? This was going to ruin the LAPD for good. It was totally humiliating. Humiliating for the captain, humiliating for the entire department. They were never going to be able to live this down. And the captain, his name was J.J. Jones, by the way. Captain Jones, he's like, oh no, this is not going to end like this. He was not going to let Christine Collins announce to the world that they have epically failed. They've brought her some rando kid, someone else's kid, and that's another thing. Who the hell is he? Where does he belong? Whose kid is he if he isn't Walter Collins? So they've got another layer of holy crap to deal with in trying to explain who this is and where his parents are, and why are you trying to pass him off as Walter Collins? And Christine Collins is on the verge of seriously about to make fools out of the police department. Not only are they a bunch of incompetent, poor excuses for law enforcement, you've also made a mockery of the entire case by staging this sham of a so-called reunion. She's like, you all are ridiculous, and she's about to call them out. And I really, really, really wish that she would have. But Captain J.J. Jones here, he's not going to let that happen. He is not going to let this woman make fools out of them. So he takes Christine aside, and he literally begins to try and sit there and convince her that the boy that they brought here is in fact her son, Walter. Can you imagine, you guys, the nerve of some cop trying to tell you that this child is your child when you know damn well it is not your child? It's like, what kind of fool does Captain Asshat think she is? To sit here to try and tell this mom that she doesn't know her own son? And the thing is, Captain Jones must get Christine to go along with this, at least for right now. They're standing there before the public, before the media, right at the train station. Every high-ranking officer is there. I mean, this was huge. It was a farce, though, but it was a big deal. He's got to get Christine to just shut up and go with this. Otherwise, she's going to do irreversible damage to their already broken down police department. So the other officers start helping Captain Jones put the pressure on Christine. If she isn't willing to go along, then they were going to make her go along. And as this is going on, the media is just kind of sort of waiting for the big reveal. They don't know or realize what the holdup is here. But all this pressure was put on Christine to just comply. And they're telling her, we believe that this is your son. Your son is saying that he's your son. You know, time has passed. It's been a little more than 5 months since you've seen him. You've been through a lot in those 5 months, Christine. You have dealt with a great deal of heartache and trauma. He's been the victim of a kidnapping. He's been missing. He's been through trauma that none of us could even begin to imagine. The way that you're seeing your son has changed. The way that he appears to everyone has changed. Trauma and an ordeal like this can warp the way you perceive things. So on top of everything else, the police are trying to convince Christine that there is something severely wrong with her. And they say, furthermore, it's our word against yours. And so with that, they kind of have her back up against the wall. What's she supposed to say or do? So after several minutes of dealing with Christine and their attempts to shut down her claim that the boy isn't hers, they finally wore her down so bad with all of this pressure to go along, telling her, look, just take him home. The words that they actually used were, give the boy a try. Give the boy a try. What the hell is that? Give him a try? Just let's do this in front of the media, accept him as your son, take him home. Clearly he needs a place to go anyway. Just please give it a try. And they're insisting she take this boy home for a few weeks and then we'll see what happens from there. Nowadays, nothing like this could ever happen. This is so bizarre and so strange. And if you think about it, you can't even think that something like this would even be taken into consideration. Nobody could be pressured into agreeing to something like this. Victims and families would be screaming from the mountaintops all over the news and social media. It's just impossible. I can imagine we're sitting here thinking, but even back then, how was Christine just going to be like, okay, I'll take him home and give him a whirl? No, just no. But these were the signs of the times. Being a woman in the 1920s wasn't exactly all that great. You're not very well respected. You've barely been given the right to vote. You're not being treated as equals. And on top of that, she has this child. She's on her own. Granted, she's a widow, but having a child without a husband was kind of looked down upon. Christine Collins is being pushed into a position where her power and her rights are being stifled by men and by law enforcement. Even the fake Walter Collins, a child, his word is being given more credibility, undoubtedly due to the fact that, yeah, the police wanted and needed him to be Walter Collins, but I'm sure it's also because he's male too. They're willing to take his word over Christine's, and it's all based on archaic, sexist viewpoints. And on top of that, Christine is all alone in this fight. She's got nobody else to turn to in the moment. It's not like her husband or Walter's dad or her dad could stand by her side and defend her and stand up for her. She's on her own, and they're coming down on her really hard to just comply. What choice did she have in the moment? She was powerless, and the police wouldn't let up. So Christine folded. She had to. In front of the cameras and the journalists and the members of the community who came to see the joyous reunion, Christine Collins welcomed her quote-unquote son home with open arms. There are archived images of the Los Angeles Times at the time, pictures taken of Christine hugging fake Walter. It's heartbreaking to see those pictures, which are 92 years old almost. 92 years ago, Christine Collins hugging a stranger on the front page of the Los Angeles Times in an effort for the LAPD to polish up its messy image. When the reunion was over, Christine took the young stranger home with her. And honestly, I don't know how Captain Doofus thinks all of this is supposed to play out. Seriously, he's all but forced Christine into taking home some rando kid. I mean, as sexist as he is and as demeaning as he acted towards Christine, He's got to know that deep down, the mama knows her boy, and that boy is not hers. Why would she lie or pretend that he's not her Walter? The answer is that she wouldn't. He can't possibly be dumb enough to think that Christine Collins was just going to go on with her life and raise a boy that is not her son, and everyone's just going to go on and live happily flippin' ever after? If he really thought that, if Captain Dumbass really believed that, he was wrong. Christine knew from the moment that she saw fake Walter that this wasn't right. She was forced into taking him home, but she is not going to allow for this to continue forever. And this was one of the things that was at the heart of the problems with the police officer within the LAPD, and probably many other police departments across the country, which continues on to this day. This is not meant to be a bashing of law enforcement, so please don't take it this way, but rather just to highlight what's going on here. What is at the core of the issues with the police when it comes to the situation with Christine Collins that she's found herself in. This is an example of the police, particularly Captain Jones, thinking that he, as an officer, has the ability and the right to wield his power and control over Christine and what she does. It has you wondering, asking, who does this guy think he is, forcing this woman to take care of a boy that wasn't hers? She was literally bullied into taking him. And in these officers' own minds, their actions are justifiable based solely on the fact that they had the power to make it happen. It's illustrative of a form of police brutality. Seriously, break it down. Captain Jones intensified the pressure on Christine. He's in her face. He's telling her, look, I hear what you're saying, that this is not Walter, but I'm going to sit here and tell you that this is Walter, and you will take him home, and you will take care of him as your son, and you will keep your mouth shut, and you will smile for the cameras. And she, in the moment, can't do a thing about it. And it's going to get even worse. So Christine and fake Walter go home. And I guess no matter how certain Christine was that this wasn't her son, she, at least for a moment, began to wonder if perhaps she was losing her mind. Like maybe she was affected by the trauma of this disappearance, like they had been trying to tell her. And I can totally understand having moments of self-doubt like that. Totally get it. She's looking at this boy, and granted, there are some vague things about him that maybe if you squeezed your eyes shut really hard, spun around in circles about a dozen times, slowly opened your eyes to little more than a squint, and stared at fake Walter, maybe she could see glimpses of her own son come through. It is making me a little bonkers to think about it myself right now, doubting our own sanity. I've been through a few moments of that since I've gotten here to Henderson, believe you me. Even though I would have totally believed in and trusted Christine's initial reaction the moment she saw this boy, she's now had time to sit there and run this whole thing through her head. And she's just got all this doubt, thinking her mind has just taken a ride on the crazy train. So Christine decided what she was going to do was take this couple of weeks where she was giving fake Walter a try and work on going back to the police with the proof that he's not her son. One of the first notable things that she was able to document is the fact that fake Walter's height does not match up with real Walter's. Fake Walter is 3 inches shorter. If it had been the other way around, if fake Walter was 3 inches taller, okay, yeah, maybe that's plausible for a boy to grow a couple of inches in a span of 5 months. At the age of 9, I don't know, perhaps. I guess it would depend on what he was being fed, but 9 seems a little young to have that type of a growth spurt. But regardless, it wasn't the case. Fake Walter was shorter, and it is impossible for him to have lost height while he was missing. Losing weight? Yes. Height? No way. However, it is worth mentioning that in the 2008 movie with Angelina Jolie, there is a scene where Christine was actually told by the doctor that it is possible for trauma to cause a person to shrink in size. I can't say for sure if that happened to Christine in her actual real-life experience. I didn't read about it. I only saw that had been included in the movie version. Christine also soon discovered that fake Walter had been circumcised, and her Walter was uncircumcised. And apparently she was also told by the same doctor that it was possible that whomever is responsible for kidnapping Walter decided to take him in to have the circumcision performed because maybe the abductors believed it was better for him to be circumcised and that it would be more advantageous in terms of personal hygiene or whatever. I don't know. Whatever the doctor said, it was sort of plausible, maybe. Pretty far-fetched, if you asked me. I mean, I guess if Walter had been kidnapped for purposes of sexual abuse and the circumcision was like a preference of the abuser, I don't know. I don't even like thinking about it. Just fake Walter was lacking the foreskin. So Christine made an appointment for fake Walter to visit her family dentist. And the dentist was able to confirm under no uncertain terms that the boy she had brought in for this exam was absolutely 100% not her Walter Collins. And dental records just don't lie. In addition, Christine was able to speak to some of real Walter's friends and his teachers from school, and all of them agreed to stand by her and support her in her insistence that the boy that the police forced her to take home was absolutely not their friend and student. This boy was a stranger. They had no idea who he was, but he was not Walter. They were willing to go to the police and make those statements official and in person. So over the course of the next several weeks, Christine was taking care of fake Walter. She kept attempting to contact Captain Jones. She went to go see him, and she's telling him repeatedly, over and over again, "This is not my son. This boy is not my son." She's showing him all of the evidence that she has compiled from his friends, his teachers, doctors, and witnesses. All of them say with absolute certainty that this child is not Walter Collins. And Captain Jones starts almost like trying to gaslight her even more into thinking that she's completely maniacal, that she's lost her mind, she has no idea what she's doing or saying, that this is her son. She just needs to shut it and go home. Take the damn boy and go home. You're acting like a hysterical woman. He tells her that she's acting like a horrible parent, a terrible mom, and her attempts at making fools of the police are going to be completely quashed by way of her own deranged, frenzied mental state. But Christine, this poor woman, she never let up. She never gave up. She kept going back to see Captain Jones, and she kept telling him, "Look, I've got a dozen or more people who will swear on a stack of Bibles that this is not Walter. I've got his dentist, his teachers, his friends. Hello, his mother telling you that this boy is not Walter. The only ones who keep insisting that this kid is Walter are you, Captain Jones, and this kid for some reason. This kid keeps saying that he's Walter, and I'm telling you, I birthed the child, and this is not the child that I birthed." But Captain keeps on telling her that she's the one that isn't seeing things the right way because she's gone through so much mental and emotional trauma. He tells her that she's acting like a mad woman. Go home and take care of your son. And she just has to keep going home with this strange kid that keeps insisting that he's Walter. I mean, this is absolutely crazy what this poor woman has been subjected to. Not just by police, but by this freaking kid. And all the while, she's thinking like, what is going on here? Who is this kid that keeps calling me mom? Why is he doing this? What is his angle? Is he going to try to kill me or take over my life? And all the while, she has to take care of this child because he's still a child. And the police are forcing her into this. It is completely unimaginable what this woman is going through. And all the while, don't forget, she has no idea where real Walter is or what's become of him. So Christine continued and continued to try to get the police to stop trying to force this fake Walter onto her, because the reality of that means that the police aren't looking for her son. She wants and needs them to take her missing son's case seriously, and how is that even going to be possible if they keep telling her to go home? The case is solved. This is her son. But still, Christine did not give up. And as she continued to try to put pressure on the police to stop insisting that she participate in this charade of pretending that fake Walter is her son, Christine is beginning to gain a small army of supporters in the community who have come to believe in what she's saying. And the community, of course, is primed to come down hard on the LAPD. They are a tremendously despised department. The public hates them. They believe the police are corrupt and incompetent, and they totally believe that the LAPD are absolutely capable of attempting to force Christine into accepting this child as Walter in order to make it like they solved the big mystery. And she is getting the backing of some pretty prominent people within the community who not only believe in her, but they are openly critical of the police department and have a platform to help drum up even more support for what they are trying to do to Christine Collins. Because to them, it is so wrong on so many levels. Not only is there a missing child, there might even now be 2 missing children, because who knows where this boy came from, or who he is, or if he's a runaway, and if his parents are somewhere freaking out about him. They've also got him living in the home of a woman who is insisting she is not his mom. She's being forced to take care of him, feed him, bathe him, and the LAPD is attempting to act like they've solved this case. The LAPD is responsible for a great deal of corruption, but this is some next level malfeasance. So the public opinion is starting to sour again. Even worse now because of what they've tried to do here to Christine and fake Walter. Captain Jones is beginning to become concerned with the possible fallout of this. It's not like he can roll back on everything. He's really gotten himself into a jam here. And he was riding so high on the publicity that he was able to gain after the public reunion with a mother and her missing son. It was all about to do a 180 and go down the drain. Not only were they going to be deemed a bunch of incompetent, good-for-nothing cops, it was going to be even worse because of what they've put Christine through. It is going to go real bad if Captain Jones doesn't figure out a way to divert this entire debacle into another direction before this ruins his career. So, what's the next thing Captain Despicable here has decided to do in order to avoid having to own up to what he's done? Well, he actually goes and has Christine Collins committed to the psychiatric wing of the Los Angeles General Hospital. As the captain, he has the option to order what is called a Code 12 internment. It's a code that specifically identifies a person who the police are dealing with who has been found to be difficult or inconvenient. So this captain here has once again wielded his power as an officer of the law to force Christine to be locked up in a mental institution without cause, just to make sure he can save face and not be made to own up to the fact that he botched the entire Walter Collins disappearance. That is all it took for Christine to be taken away, for this guy to deem her to be a Code 12. Another instance of abuse of power that this man uses against her. And she ends up being hospitalized and kept under observation. And in that time, she's dealing with the doctors and the psychiatrists, and she's telling them that she's perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with her. She is not having a mental break. She has been unjustly committed by the LAPD captain, J.J. Jones, because he is trying to get her out of the way. He is trying to shut her up. And she explained what happened with her son Walter and what they forced her to do with a different boy, a boy that she doesn't know. She has no idea who he is. He vaguely looks similar, but the fact is that he's not her son, and they kept pushing her to try and pretend that he is, and she's like fighting the police on this. She wants them to find her actual son, and she keeps telling them that this is not her boy, so in order to shut her up, they've had her committed. But the doctors, they're not really inclined to side with Christine on this, because they often work with the police. Whenever they have someone in custody or someone that they are dealing with that is being particularly problematic for them, it was common procedure to order the Code 12 and have them locked up in the psych ward. So they really aren't seeing Christine as anything particularly special or different. She's just another hysterical woman, just like many of the other patients the police have sent over in the past. The doctors told Christine, "These are the police. Their job is to protect and serve. They work for you to keep you safe and out of harm's way. They are not out there to hurt you or to do you or any other innocent persons any harm. And the fact that you insist that this is something the LAPD is trying to do has led us to believe that you are suffering from paranoid delusions because the police just wouldn't do something like you're claiming that they're doing. And what adds to your hysteria is the fact that you have your son is with you, he's telling you he's your son, and you are being dismissive and you are denying the claims of this child, and that in and of itself is harmful to him, and the fact that you are his mother and refusing to accept him as your son is just another aspect of your actions that has us believing that you are legitimately insane." In the end, the doctors come to the conclusion that Christine is to be diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and they're going to have to keep her locked up in the psychiatric hospital. I suppose for an indefinite amount of time, and they prescribe her drugs to help treat her non-existent medical condition. So now you can imagine that Christine is super frustrated with her situation here, which is only getting worse and worse by the day. There seems to be no end in sight. She ends up being kept in this institution for about 10 days. So let's go ahead and pause Christine's story here for a moment. Because remember towards the beginning I mentioned that there was a parallel story that was going on here at the same time as Walter's disappearance and Christine's dealings with the LAPD. That second story is commonly known as the Wineville chicken coop murders. And I think now would be a good time to go over this offshoot of this unbelievable story. So in the late 1920s, the agricultural industry was growing very fast and very lucrative, not only in Southern California, but throughout the entire state, with its relatively favorable weather year-round. The farming town of Wineville, located in Riverside County, was no exception. In Wineville, there was a chicken farm owned by a man named Gordon Northcott. Now, Northcott was born in Bladworth, Saskatchewan, Canada. It was incorporated as a village in 1906. I don't know for sure what the population of Bladworth was the year that Northcott was born, which was the same year it became a village, 1906. But today the population is 65. And I do believe in all the episodes that we've done here on the show and on Patreon, this is by far the least populated town that we've ever discussed, at least currently. The population of Bladworth, I was only able to go back to 1980, and at that time there were 124 people. So it has steadily declined in the last 40 years. But 65 people are still hanging in there. And I'm going to kind of go off topic for a moment. Out of curiosity, I went to try and find the least populated town, at least here in the United States. And I found the smallest incorporated town to be Monowi, Nebraska. Population 1. And her name is Elsie Eiler. Now, I'm telling you this because I kind of felt like this was sort of a feel-good, interesting little story. I had never heard of it before. Maybe some of you have heard of this town in Nebraska, but let me share this with you. When Elsie's husband, Rudy, died in 2004, the population of Monowi was slashed in half, going from 2 residents to 1. Since then, Elsie has worked as the town mayor, the librarian, the city clerk, and she is the proprietor of the Monowi Tavern, which she has operated for 50 years. Monowi used to have a larger population some decades ago with residents numbering around 150, but the farming jobs dwindled over time as things became more automated. But Elsie still gets visitors who come to town, as her tavern does bring people in. People in the area, they all know Elsie because their parents and their grandparents also all know Elsie. She's a fixture in the area, and she's managed to survive because of that. And people do come from all over to visit her tavern. She has a guest book, and she has visitors from all 50 states, as well as more than 50 countries around the world. Now, the Norfolk Daily News recently ran an article about Elsie and how she was doing during this COVID-19 pandemic. And as mayor, she obviously has not had to ban public gatherings or shut down businesses or enforce social distancing guidelines. Right now, Elsie is 86 years old and still going strong as Monowi's lone resident. So she'd been able to keep her town going as usual as this pandemic spread. And you'd think being the only resident of the town, she'd be used to the isolation, but it's actually quite the opposite. In April, the governor of Nebraska ordered the closure of all restaurants and bars. And that included Elsie's beloved tavern. She did tell the Daily News that this is really the loneliest that she's ever been in her entire life. When she heard the news that the governor had ordered the shutdown, she called up the sheriff, and he told Elsie that he would come by and talk to her to explain things to her in person. When he got there the next day, there were 3 people in the tavern having drinks, and Elsie was told that she had to ask them to leave. But she hasn't exactly had to close the tavern. I think in a little bit of a low-key way, the sheriff sort of insinuated that she could police herself in this pandemic. So that's kind of what she's chosen to do. If you swing by the tavern, she'll sell you a beer to go. And if someone calls in an order for a meal, Elsie's happy to make it for them, to come and pick it up. The state of Nebraska has been worried about many of its small town businesses, and that's probably true across the country. And how are they going to survive the pandemic with no money coming in because they've had to close and shutter their doors? But nobody's worried about Elsie's Tavern. She's survived 50 years running it. She's survived 86 years of her life. She'll survive this. Anyway, I just thought that was a really nice little side story to this otherwise dark case, but let's get back to it. So Northcott is from Bladworth. Other than him being the most notable and notorious person born there, the only other thing Bladworth is notable for is that disc golf was purportedly invented by a small group of elementary school children in Bladworth in 1926. So they do have that claim to fame. So, just like tens of other people, Gordon Northcott and his parents moved from Bladworth to Los Angeles in 1924 when he was 17. A couple of years later, when Northcott was 19, he asked his dad to help him acquire a plot of land in a town called Wineville, which his father did. And with the help of his dad and his nephew, and you need to remember this nephew, his name is Sanford Clark, together the three of them constructed this chicken farm. However, while Sanford was traveling from Bladworth to Los Angeles, it was under the guise to help his uncle work on his chicken farm. Northcott was actually physically and sexually abusing the boy. Sanford had an older sister named Jessie, and in August of 1928, she had grown concerned about him. And I don't know how it was she came to be worried, if he had called her or sent letters, or if she just had this feeling or a vibe. But there just came this time when she was worried about her little brother. So she decided to travel from Bladworth to Wineville to see him, to check up on him. And when she got there, Sanford quickly confided in her that he was tremendously worried and living in a great deal of fear for his life. He tried to open up to his sister as much as possible without Northcott overhearing or getting wise to the conversations. Sanford eventually one night told his sister that not only was he being abused, but he knew of at least 4 young boys that Northcott had killed. In essence, they're dealing with a serial killer in the family. At the time of this visit, Sanford was 15 years old, and Gordon Northcott was about 20 or 21. So Jessie, not wanting to raise any suspicions that she knew what was going on, decided to head back to Canada, and she did not take her little brother with her, which I can't blame her. I don't even know if she had the ability to take him, or if they feared that Northcott would figure out that she knew and was attempting to flee with him. So she had to make, I'm sure, the painful decision to leave her little brother behind, knowing that he was at the mercy of their abusive, murderous uncle. When Jessie arrived back in Canada, she went to the American consulate and spoke to a representative there about what was going on at her uncle's chicken farm and the things that her brother had told her about. She provided the consulate with a sworn statement in writing with everything that she knew, and subsequent to that, the representative sent a letter to the LAPD with the information that Jessie had provided. The LAPD, after receiving this letter from the consulate in Canada, consulted with the Department of Immigration since it involved a Canadian citizen. This prompted a visit by 2 immigration inspectors to the Wineville chicken farm on August 31st, 1928, with the intentions of picking up Sanford Clark, which they did. Northcott, however, was pretty vigilant about keeping an eye out for unexpected visitors. So when he spotted the agents driving towards the ranch, he ran towards a dense tree line adjacent to the property. Before he left, he gave Sanford explicit instructions to stall the agents for as long as possible. And if he failed to do so, he told Sanford that he would climb to the top of one of the trees with his rifle and shoot him to death. And somehow, Sanford managed to stall the agents for about 2 hours. All the while, Northcott was fleeing further and further away from the farm on foot. Eventually, Sanford felt comfortable enough that Northcott was probably long gone, so he went ahead and confessed to the agents that Northcott had fled into the tree line, which went on for miles. At some point, Northcott hooked up with his mom. Her name was Sarah Louise, and together they made their way north, crossing the international border into British Columbia at some point. However, about 20 days later, on September 19th, they were arrested in Vernon, British Columbia. Sanford provided investigators with the details of what Northcott, his mom, and himself had been involved in on the chicken farm. He said that his uncle had kidnapped, sexually abused, beat, and murdered 4 young boys, and his mom and he himself helped him. He said he was forced to help cover up the killings and dispose of the bodies, and that they used lime in order to aid in the progression of the decomposition, and that they also burned bodies as well. Now, Sanford said he was witness to 4 of the killings. However, it was believed that Northcott may have been responsible for at least 11 murders, possibly even as many as 20. The cases of missing young boys in the area simply weren't being connected. And in this window of time, this is when Walter Collins vanished, in March of 1928. The last time Walter was seen was approximately 5 p.m. the afternoon of March 10th by a neighbor of his and his mother's, and this would have been near the corner of Pasadena Avenue and North Avenue 23 in what is known as the Lincoln Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles. And as I said, the LAPD had launched an exhaustive search for Walter. His case was becoming high profile and reported on extensively in the media, and they wanted to solve this to do some damage control to their negative public image that they had been known for. They investigated Walter's dad, Walter Sr. If you recall in the beginning, I mentioned that he was pretty much a career criminal, a fact that he hidden from Christine. Investigators on the case looked into perhaps someone was attempting to get back at his dad or to seek retribution for something that the elder Walter had done to them by harming his son. In addition to having earned himself enemies outside of prison, Walter also was well on his way to earning himself enemies inside of prison because he was given the job duty of working the kitchen and the cafeteria, and part of his job was to report any violations on the part of the other inmates. So basically, Walter Sr. is a snitch. But nothing really panned out that connected anything that Walter's dad had done to his disappearance. There had also been hundreds of tips that came in, and one of the tips in particular that piqued the interest of investigators was that there was a man who managed a gas station located in Glendale, California, and his name was Richard Struthers. He told police that a quote-unquote foreign couple had stopped and asked for directions, and he kind of did a quick glance into the backseat of the car, and he noticed the dead body of a boy wrapped in newspapers. As the couple pulled away from the gas station, Struthers quickly told another witness nearby, a guy named C.V. Staley, what he had seen, so Staley got into his car and tried to discreetly follow the couple. The couple had pulled over near a local police station for a few minutes, but then suddenly just booked it out of there, speeding away so quickly that Staley lost them. When these 2 witnesses were shown pictures of Walter Collins, they both insisted that that was the boy that they had seen in the back seat. There were also other tips that were phoned in reporting a couple driving around in various areas in and around Southern California with a young boy in the car crying and asking to be let go. Again, all of the tips led to dead ends. And I'm not even sure if the witness accounts were accurate. I guess perhaps it's easy to tell if someone from Canada is quote-unquote foreign, so to speak, if you can pick up on an accent, or if the foreigners have a strong, distinct Canadian accent. And also, he called them a couple, but if it was Northcott and his mom, I think it would be kind of obvious that she was much older than him, and being a couple may not have been the first presumption. And on top of that, why would the couple keep a dead body in the back seat, hastily wrapped in newspaper in such a way that not only can the witness tell that there is a dead boy back there, but also be able to identify him as Walter Collins later on when a photo was shown, And C.V. Staley also identified the dead boy as Walter Collins, but at no time was he having the opportunity to look into the back seat the way that Struthers did. So for those reasons, I don't put a great deal of credence into these sightings. Now, there were other boys that went missing during this period. Brothers Nelson and Lewis Winslow, who were 10 and 12 respectively, disappeared as they were walking home together in the city of Pomona, California on May 16, 1928. The thing that was different about their disappearance was that their mom and dad were getting bizarre letters in the mail telling them that they were heading to Mexico, and another one that said that they were going to remain missing so that they can try to become famous. Then there was another case in La Puente, California, where the body of a boy believed to be an immigrant from Mexico was discovered but was missing his head. This particular victim, Sanford went into great deal talking about, telling the investigators that he was ordered by his uncle to smash the boy's decapitated head and set it on fire. But the LAPD never connected Walter, the Winslow brothers, or the Hispanic boy, nor were any alarm bells raised when a neighbor of Northcott's phoned in a complaint to police about a boy being mistreated at a poultry farm. They just didn't put it together. They didn't connect dots here. It would be Northcott's nephew who finally gave police the information that they needed when he told them about the Winslow brothers, the Hispanic boy, and Walter Collins. Sanford said that Northcott would abduct these boys off the street. He would sexually assault them, and then when he was finished, he would take them to the area where they kept the chicken eggs to be incubated, and he would murder them with an axe and then cover up their remains with lime in order to speed up decomposition. Sanford told police where the bodies of the Winslow brothers were, which were buried near the chicken coops. A search of the property did uncover 2 graves, but there were only remnants of a few pieces of bone. They did find an axe in the tool shed that did have blood and hair stuck to it. They found several pieces of bone in various locations around the farm, which were determined to have come from young male children. Inside the home, investigators discovered a library book that had been checked out by one of the Winslow boys, as well as a few more letters that were addressed to their parents, as well as their Boy Scout badges. However, there was nothing inside the farmhouse that could be definitively linked as belonging to Walter Collins. However, later on, as the farm was searched, there were some scraps and pieces of clothing that appeared to match what Walter was wearing when he was last seen, but it could never be identified for sure as being his. Northcott's own father, Cyrus George Northcott, did admit to police a couple of days into the investigation into the chicken farm that his son told him that he had murdered Walter Collins. But Northcott and his mom had already absconded to Canada by this point. Now, at this time, as Northcott has come onto police radar as a serial killer, child abductor, abuser, and murderer, Christine was locked up, institutionalized on that Code 12 thanks to Captain J.J. Jerkface. And the LAPD was still trying to push the narrative that they had recovered her son, that they were heroes, blah, blah, blah. Captain Fullishit finally had to give it up when his own police handwriting expert had taken a look at some of fake Walter's writing and compared it to real Walter's writing, and the styles were found to be very different from each other. Particularly the way the letter R was written was something that had been traditionally taught in the Midwest, not out here in California. And since Christine had been committed, they had been working with fake Walter, and it was clear that his story was beginning to fall apart under the scrutiny. Eventually, finally, fake Walter admitted what Christine and all of her supporters had been insisting all along. He wasn't Walter Collins. Well, duh. He admitted that he had a few other fake names that he had used, but he picked up on this great idea to impersonate Walter Collins because someone in his hometown had pointed out that he looked similar to the missing child that they had been reading about in the newspapers. His real name was Arthur Hutchins, and he was 12 years old. I did find a side-by-side picture of Walter and Arthur, and they do look strikingly similar. But you know, a mama knows, okay? A mama knows, and you cannot fool a mom. I'll try to remember to post the pictures of the boys side by side when this episode goes live. And dreamers, we might be sitting here wondering, scratching our heads, why in the world would this kid try to pull off a stunt like this? I mean, he was lucky he was able to get away with it because the police were willing to bully Christine into accepting him as her son for the good publicity. But why did Arthur do it? Well, the reason he did this, he told police, is because he knew Walter was from the Los Angeles area, and he wanted to try and find a way to get to Hollywood so he could meet his favorite cowboy movie star, Tom Mix. I had never heard of Tom Mix, so just real quick, he was born in January of 1880. He appeared in a total of 291 Western films between 1909 and 1935. All of them were silent films with the exception of 9 of them. He is known to be the very first Hollywood Western star and is credited with shaping and defining that genre of film. Yep, this was Arthur's hero and his whole reason for pretending to be Walter Collins. I wasn't able to find if he achieved his goal of meeting Tom Mix or not. I don't think he did, but I could not find if it ever happened. Arthur's stepmom, once the jig was up and his plans were foiled, she had to come out to California and come get his ass and take him back to Illinois. And it was reported that Arthur really didn't feel bad for what had happened to Christine. He said she must have known that he wasn't her son, and the fact that she went along with it only goes to show that it was all just a big joke to her too. I'm going to refrain from judging this little brat for having a rotten, stinking little attitude about it because he's only 12. Maybe he got a whooping when he got home. Not condoning child abuse, but that's the old-fashioned way of handling these naughty kids back then. That's right. Spank, spank, spank. After Arthur was sent home, Christine was discharged from the psych ward. As for Gordon Northcott, after he was taken into custody, he was brought back down to his Wineville ranch and interrogated so police could get as much information out of him as possible. And he ended up confessing to a total of 5 murders at that time. The 4 that we've already mentioned, plus another boy named Alvin Gathia. Northcott's mom, Sarah Louise, she ended up confessing to murdering Walter Collins herself, admitting it was she who delivered the fatal blows to him with the axe and burying him in a grave near the chicken coops. Sarah Louise Northcott would end up pleading guilty to Walter's murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, she only served 12 years at Tehachapi State Prison and was released sometime around 1940, and then she died 4 years later. As for her son, he went on trial for his role in the killings in January of 1929. And by the way, Northcott, I saw his mugshot on Wikipedia, and I kept looking at him and staring at his picture, and I thought, God, he looks so familiar. And then it came to me. He sort of looks like a young Joaquin Phoenix. Not today's middle-aged, bearded Joaquin Phoenix, like 1990s Joaquin Phoenix. I'll post the mugshot on social media too when I post this episode. So anyway, Northcott was one of those defendants that likes to play musical chairs with his attorneys. He likes to hire and fire until he thinks he knows enough to try and represent himself. He told the court that he did abuse the boys, but it was all because of a misguided love that he had for them. His mom testified on his behalf and admitted to the court that she was actually his grandmother, that her husband had raped their daughter, and she ended up becoming pregnant with Gordon Northcott. He also told the court that he had long engaged in sexual relations with both of his parents, and I know all of this sounds really twisted and bizarre, but the court really didn't believe him, nor did they believe anything that the mom was saying. And they didn't believe that any of this incest was going on, that it was an attempt to garner their sympathies. But Northcott's mom repeatedly stated on the stand that she would do anything for her son, and the jury took that as she would get on the stand and lie for her son. So on February 8th, 1929, the jury found Northcott guilty of 3 murders, the Winslow brothers and the one unidentified Hispanic victim, and he was sentenced to death. On October 2nd, 1930, Gordon Northcott was hanged at San Quentin State Prison. He was 23 years old at the time of his death. And to put a final end to the story of the Wineville chicken coop murders once and for all, Wineville officially changed its name to Mira Loma on November 1st, 1930, which ultimately helped distance it from the infamous killings that occurred there. As for Sanford Clark, Northcott's nephew, while he was abused, he did admit to some role in these murders. However, the district attorney believed wholeheartedly that he too was a victim and participation on his part was forced, that he did so unwillingly and under duress. However, they felt like they needed to do something. So, in an unprecedented move, they went ahead and sentenced Sanford to 5 years at the Whittier State School, which was an experimental facility for delinquent children. Later, his sentence was cut to less than 2 years. Sanford ended up going to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where he lived out the rest of his life. He died in 1991 at the age of 78. As for Christine Collins, she did not take what happened to her laying down. She was not going to let Captain Jones get away with what he did to her. So shortly after she was released from being committed, she sued the captain directly. Normally, we would think that the thing to do would be to sue the LAPD, but in this case, the captain himself was sued. And Christine did prevail, and she was awarded almost $11,000, which when I put that into the inflation calculator, it came to about $165,000 today. But the captain was never forced or compelled to pay the judgment against him. I mean, even today, it's hard to enforce a judgment when you sue somebody and win. Some years ago, I sued a computer repair business that charged me a lot of money to fix my computer, but it was never really fixed. I won my lawsuit, but I never got the money because it is so hard to enforce. You can hire the sheriff to go into their business and go directly into their cash registers and take the money, but the process cost you even more money, and it was just such a hassle. But anyway, Christine never saw the money that she was awarded. Now, as for why Captain Jones was sued and not the LAPD, I kind of wondered why that was. And one reason I thought could have been plausible is that the LAPD may have been trying to distance itself from the whole Walter Collins debacle. And a component of that may have been the powers that be making the executive decision that they would throw one or two of their people under the bus to take the fall for the whole thing. We'll blame just this guy and that guy. We'll make another public spectacle out of it and then quietly move on without having to take responsibility for what happened. The department can just point to them and say, oh, they did it, and then run the other way. And a part of that involved both the captain and the chief of police losing rank. They didn't lose their jobs, but they were demoted down, stripped of their titles. But the thing about that is I believe that there was probably some sort of secretive backroom deal that the department had with the captain and the chief, because it wasn't long before they were both given their jobs back. So this leads me to believe that, again, they attempted for the LAPD to portray this whole thing as something more than it actually was. Like this was a harsh disciplinary action that they were taking against the officers who did this to Christine. They told the two of them, look, we're going to demote you and we're going to place the blame of this whole thing on you guys. Just suck it up for now. And once the dust settles, we'll get you back into your jobs and we'll move on like nothing ever happened. And what about the committing of Christine Collins into the mental hospital in the manner in which they did? Well, that was a clear violation of her rights, and what the state of California did was pass a bill later on that required law enforcement to obtain a warrant signed by a judge that would authorize committing someone into a psychiatric hospital. So they would have to go through the process of providing sufficient proof that the person should be committed, and this would involve that person in question being evaluated by a doctor, and that doctor giving their professional opinion as to whether or not this person should be taken in. So no longer would the police be able to commit whomever they pleased just because they were getting annoyed with somebody. They'd have to go through the proper procedures before they could just code 12 anyone just because they felt like it. Now, before we get to the end of the story, I do need to mention that there had been some speculation that Walter may not have been murdered by the Northcotts, either by Gordon or his mom. There had been some that believed that Walter may have even actually escaped either the kidnapping or the chicken farm. And there was never really any definitive proof that he had ever been at the chicken farm. There was no evidence that verified he was one of the victims when it came to the bits of bones and clothing that was found around the property. And because of that, Christine Collins decided to hold on to the hope that Walter was still out there somewhere in the world, alive and well, and she did indeed spend the remainder of her life continuing her search for her son. She never lost hope that there was that possibility, and she held on to that until her death on December 8th, 1964, at the age of 76. Throughout this entire ordeal, Christine fought a hard battle. No matter what she was attacked with, she may have been slowed down, she may have been temporarily blocked from pushing forward, but she never stopped. She fought against a tremendous amount of sexism coming from her from every institution: law enforcement, the medical community, doctors, psychiatrists. Even fake Walter was able to get over on her for a while. They attempted to get Christine to think that she was the one who was crazy, that she was insane, that she was a paranoid schizophrenic, that she was in hysterics. She was a terrible mom because she was rejecting her own child. She was crazy to think that the police were conspiring against her like this. When she was forced into taking home a boy she kept insisting wasn't her son. She was involuntarily committed for no other reason than she was unwilling to relent in her fight for her rights. They viewed her as some sort of out-of-control woman who lived in a constant state of maniacal hysterics because she didn't have a husband to control her or to keep her in line. On top of that, Christine Collins was a victim in another way that everyone seemed to forget about. She was a mother of a kidnapping victim. Nobody seemed to acknowledge or care that this woman was missing her one and only child. And as she was suffering through everything that these men were putting her through, she was still trying to grapple with the anguish of not knowing what became of her child. And then to come to find that he was likely kidnapped, abused, and murdered on a chicken farm. I mean, I don't even know how she came out of this alive, to be honest. And as far as the police abusing their power, This is an overriding theme in this story as well. The LAPD and perhaps many police departments across the country, but most notably the LAPD in this story, have had a long history of behaving as though the laws and rules don't apply to them. And that is demonstrated numerous times throughout their dealings with Christine Collins. So you can imagine how they're going to behave with real criminals out there. As a matter of fact, one of the policies that was more of an unwritten, understood thing was that the police chief more or less encouraged that justice be carried out on the streets, that the criminals just be cut down. Don't even bother bringing them in alive for them to have to arrest and process and send to court. So when you take that into consideration in terms of how minorities have been treated by police back then, I mean, the LAPD has long been considered to be an incredibly racist police force, with Los Angeles having an ever-growing population of minorities throughout the 20th century. Obviously, with what's going on now with police forces across the country over the last several years, with cameras and body cams everywhere, we're seeing more and more examples of what isn't necessarily an increase of police brutality and use of excessive force against minorities, because it has been a thing that's happened throughout history. It's just we're seeing it more now because of cameras. So we can only just imagine what it was like back then during the time that this story takes place for minorities, just based on what we see going on here in our story. Forcing Christine to actually take in a child that wasn't hers and then having her involuntarily committed. There is no way the police would not be held accountable for something like that today. At least I hope not. There, of course, have been improvements, and the abuse of power and the use of excessive force is clearly still a problem today. And I don't really like to get into these divisive issues on the show, but because it is a component of our story today, I did feel like it was important to acknowledge that the problem continues, and it continues to be ongoing even today. Not every cop, but the few that have the potential to be problematic out there, to be dangerous, to be abusing their power. I mean, as a society, there's only so much that we can do. I support the peaceful protesting, and I believe in what people know and understand that needs to change. Yes, these officers that commit these crimes, they're going to be arrested, they're going to be charged, they're going to go to trial, but what are the chances that they're going to be acquitted? I mean, we've seen that happen over and over again. I'll just say that I think that we need to deal with the problem before it gets to that point, before another person dies at the hands of a police officer's use of excessive force. And for me, what I think that there needs to be is more administrative and disciplinary action taken more often from an outside entity. I don't think the police can police themselves, and I'll just leave it at that. Christine Collins was tragic, but also heroic at the same time. And I thoroughly enjoyed getting to know her and her story as I went through the research of this case. And that will bring us to the end of the tale of the Changeling. Please come on over to our Facebook group if you haven't done so yet and request to join. This week, I kind of sort of spilled the tea on what was going on in my personal life. And I want to thank all of you for all of your love and support and kind words. It really meant a lot to me. And I'm glad to inform some of you who thought that I was terminally ill or had the coronavirus that I'm perfectly healthy. I was just going through some really big changes in life. And if you want to know about it, come and join the Facebook page because I poured my heart out. And aside from me whining and boo-hooing about my life, we also discuss the cases that we cover. we share our thoughts and opinions, not only about our show, but any other podcast that you listen to, documentaries that you've watched, books that you've read, and oh my goodness, this Unsolved Mysteries has got me going crazy. I haven't watched them all yet. I've only watched 1.5 of them because I'm trying not to blow through them too fast, but man, I'm really enjoying that show a lot. So also books that you've read. We talk about current news stories. We post memes, so please come over and share. You can also go to the show's Facebook page and like that page and leave a review or a recommendation. You can also follow us on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and Instagram at CaliforniaDreamingPod. California Dreaming is brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network. It's a podcast production company on a mission to create some of the best podcasts to listen to with an eclectic roster of shows and content including true crime, history, sports, entertainment, gaming, and social media. And the hosts of all of these shows are absolutely amazing and talented people. So come and visit our website at www.orbitaljigsaw.com. You will find links to all of our podcasts as well as a direct link to our merchandise store and TeePublic. Again, it's www.orbitaljigsaw.com. And dreamers, thank you again so much for all of your love this week, for embracing me and understanding the things that I've been going through over the past couple of months. I'm your host, Roseanne. I love you all so much. Until next time, sweet dreams.